There you go. Jeanne?
Coming. Start.
In case you can't read your screen, my name is Valerie Young. I serve as the Synod leader and stated clerk for the Synod of the Sun, and Reverend Jeanne Radak is a Presbytery leader for the Presbytery of the Highlands, and she's going to start us off.
Let's go back. We are, Valerie and I are served on the GA Committee on Per Capita and Financial Sustainability. And this committee was made up of 2 action items from the General Assembly, and they kind of brought these 2 committees together because they kind of informed each other together. So we ended up as a sort of a very large committee that had 2 responsibilities. One was for review of the financial sustainability, and the other one was for per capita. In order to do such it was a very large mandate, we broke into 2 groups, and Valerie and I worked in the per capita group to begin with, and then we brought our work together. So today we're just really talking about the per capita part of our responsibility. Yesterday we shared the financial sustainability. Between the committee as a whole, we have come up with 2 recommendations, and we'll go over that. But the charge of the committee is that somewhere around 2018, an overture came from the Presbytery of Newton, and it was amplified by a call that same year to raise per capita 40%, if some of you remember that. And all of a sudden this little overture became kind of a big deal. The team was to review the overture past the General Assembly, and the team was to review the current funding system and make recommendations of potential experiments for changes to the system. They were to report at the 224th, and now they are reporting to, obviously, to the 225th. Valerie? Oh, this is still mine, sorry. All right, what we were supposed to do is to review the current per capita system of funding of the Ministry of Councils higher than the session, see if there's financial sustainability over the next 10 years using this system, to identify the adaptive and technical challenges of that sustainability, and consult and receive feedback from the leadership of the denomination, and to make a final report of their work along with recommendations, suggestions of potential experiments for changes to the system and the funds of the Ministry of the Councils. That was our charge.
And if you were a part of the group yesterday in the workshop regarding unification of PMA and OGA, some of this looks familiar to you. But it's all very important. So this is the basic timeline of our work. Once we came together as a full committee, we, in good Presbyterian fashion, split into the 2 teams, and per capita, most importantly for, I think, our group today, the per capita team began listening sessions all throughout 2019. We listened and we listened and we listened some more. In December of 2019, well, backing up like a month or so, we had been given, I think, I'll call it an opportunity only because I can't remember the exact phrasing of it. Carrie probably will, from the Moving Forward Implementation Commission at the time, to bring together heads of agencies for collaborative conversation on per capita and a self-study. In 2019, the financial sustainability team turned in their report to the agencies as they were directed. And then we all know what happened in 2020. And after the General Assembly, well, our team like each other so much that we got together again just to visit. But then we also began to, in the summer of 2021, follow up with mid-council leaders in the midst of the pandemic to ask some questions about how they were experiencing finances and per capita at that time. It was very much in the midst of the pandemic. So here's what we want to do with you today. We've done this. We wanted to clarify our charge. Our charge was was not very clearly not to implement experiments. Our recommendation is that we'll go over that a little bit later, but it is to create a committee that will help to implement some experiments. We're going to talk mostly, I think, spend the majority of our time talking about what we learned through our conversations with you, and to fully engage in conversation with you as mid-council leaders. We lean into this conversation with the understanding that we are, as individuals and collectively as the church, creative, resourceful, and whole. God has given us what we need, not only to enter into these conversations, but to fund God's church. This one's yours, Jeanne.
Oh, I had it down as yours. Okay. So the highlights of our charge, as you can see, is to review the funding system and look at the challenges and make a report. And as Valerie said, what we did in our process is we listened. We listened to Presbytery and Synod leadership. We gathered known data. We looked for unknown data through documents, questions, conversations on very many places. We consulted and received feedback through the listening sessions. We had Google forms, and we had more conversations. And then we collated this, all this data, which was, I forget, pages and pages and pages, of information. We interpreted it, we wrote some, we made some recommendations, we did some more consultations, we did some more conversations, we wrote some more, we shared our report. You get the drift of what we did. And then after we had written up the report, had it actually ready to go to the General Assembly in 2020. We all know that got stopped. But in 2021, we knew that things had changed for everybody financially and otherwise. And so we came back and we have updated our last report using information about our pandemic learnings. So the listening sessions that we did in 2019 and some in 2021, but in 2019, we met with all 16 synods and had additional conversations during the pandemic with, I forget how many more, Valerie would know. We've talked to over 200 Presbytery execs, stated clerks, a few moderators and officers. We met with mid-council leaders gatherings. We met with the financial, the PCUSA Financial Network and others. And then we had online forms that people could fill in throughout this whole process. Valerie, you're doing this one.
Yeah. So here is it, the nutshell of what we learned that is valued essentially across the church from all of the people that we talked to about per capita, that it is connectional in nature. We know that we're a connectional church, that it represents community. It's fair and equitable nature, and we can debate later perhaps what that means. that it represents shared mission, that per capita has offers a particular, there are a particular set of services that are received as from the national church. There are diverse, many diverse interpretations of per capita for as many presbyteries, as many councils of the church that there are that many interpretations of per capita. We value the theology behind it, that it comes from a sense of abundance. I'm sorry, I don't remember that piece, but I'm sure Jeanne can talk more about that. And the mutual benefits to all of mid-councils. What we heard from leaders about the funding model, that, let's see, the of course it represents continued connection. Oh wait, sorry, this isn't about per capita in particular, is that right, Jeanne? This is about a funding model.
A funding model. So we did ask the question, what would be a different funding model if we could change the funding model, come up with, throw out everything, start with something new. These were the things that people really wanted us to explore. A funding model that is not membership based, continued connection, that it has a kind of thing, that it's fair for the whole community, this is a one we heard a lot of, that it releases some of the monetary pressure put on the presbytery level. As we all know, presbyteries are kind of caught between a rock and a hard place on some of these. They want, we heard that there needed to be better and more interpretation of how the funding is used and that kind of thing. And the big thing we heard also too, that it be based on recent information. As we know, our per capita is based on what is 2 years old. So, how can we find a way to base it on real time? And communication. Folks just didn't feel like there was enough and they want more. Do you want to do the pandemic learning?
Yeah, because we did some follow-up conversations. I couldn't tell you how many presbyteries, but I think there were presbyteries in 4 different synods, at least 4 different synods, that we were able to get in contact with. And what we heard from that is that the obvious, man, that we know that the definition of membership is ever evolving, and even more so now. The financial stress has accelerated that. Even though for some of us, for some of our councils, we may have found some relief in the payroll protection plan, there is still significant anxiety for not only for now, but for the future. And that the question around how the digital season continues to affect church and presbytery life, and there's still so much that is unclear about post-pandemic financial realities, if and when we get to that point.
And what we've learned is this keeps changing every time we talk to somebody, especially that post-pandemic financial realities. We're still learning and it's still evolving. All right, what did we learn about understanding of per capita? It's valued for its community nature and fairness and connectionalism. It has many different interpretations of per capita. Louisville is seen as one entity, even though we know that it is many. But if you ask people, and these are even, mid-council leaders often sort of merge what PMA and OGA do into one, and that's usually Louisville. And there is not enough communication or clarity around funding and around per capita. Though we have to say, when that was first brought up in 2019, that has improved over since then.
Right. One of our original recommendations when that were sent in for the last General Assembly that was referred was about moving having the MEAs take on the work of interpretation. I would add to this now, for me, the word contextual communication about per capita. For, as I said, for every council, there's a different way of interpreting, not only interpreting, but there's a different way. Some assess per capita, some don't. Some, there's a different way of doing it. And therefore the communication needs to be contextual.
So what did we learn about presbyteries and synods? One is the majority of the presbyteries submit 100% of their per capita, and are struggling to be able to continue that in this post-pandemic world. There is a correlation between the increase in per capita and a decrease in mission giving, however you do that in your presbytery. So if a presbytery or the General Assembly or the Synod increases the per capita number, the mission giving goes down, and that has been accentuated during the pandemic. Presbyteries have different interpretations of per capita, and we've said that before, and therefore there are many different ways it's communicated. And presbyteries also utilize many different financial communication tools. So as many different presbyteries, there are different ways they communicate per capita, and some don't even communicate per capita.
I think one other learning, I can speak personally anyway, is that I was really surprised that many mid-council leaders weren't aware that there were so many differences.
Yeah.
Some weren't aware that others were pulling from their reserves in order to pay 100%, and some weren't aware that there are those presbyteries who simply view per capita as a pass-through, and pass-through only send on to General Assembly only what they receive in per capita. Yeah.
One of our charges was we had to identify adaptive challenges around this. And some of the adaptive challenges is Presbyterians and synods share positive stories of connections between mid-councils and agencies. They face financial challenges beyond just not enough money. The call, an example would be a call from the congregations for more resourcing and support, and they're just not enough staff or finances to provide what the congregations need. And Presbytery's challenges include structure, communication, leadership, especially now post-pandemic anxiety and trauma. And the retirement and resignation of pastors is also a major challenge that we've heard on this post-pandemic listening. Do you want to add anything to that, Valerie?
No, I think that the biggest thing, the thing that I heard the most in the follow-up conversations was about anxiety around filling the pulpits, congregational leadership.
Over to you, Valerie.
We learned that there is a lack of clarity on the use of per capita among agencies. There is a perception that there is infighting between PMA and OGA, a perception that the 6 agencies and A Corp don't communicate well among themselves, that A Corp is not understood. And some of this, again, goes back to the pre-pandemic thing. And some of it continues and has exacerbated in some ways. Everybody loves Presbyterian disaster assistance with good reason.
Yeah.
And I know them as PILP. BOP and the foundation have many positive stories, and they're really good at telling them.
Yeah, we heard those positive stories in our listening sessions from people.
Mm-hmm.
You got the last word here.
Yeah, so what we learned, and these are our last, the last words about this, is that per capita no longer fits the church today. A new model of funding should be based on or could be based on a percentage of budget or income. What portion of the budget or where that, what part of the income that we're talking about is certainly up for debate. It should be simple and based on real time. In today's world, that now that we all know how to use Zoom, and all of the other technology behind it, online donating and all of those things, that it should be based on real time. Presbyteries are squeezed, and you can no longer continue with per capita and making up the difference on your own. A lot of what we heard, especially in the early listening sessions, was frustration because there are so many congregations who don't give their per capita or at their per capita levels, and presbyteries, for the most part, want to pay that 100%. And so they pull from their own, and it stresses them beyond measure. And that the pandemic has just made everything worse.
Yes.
That's a given, I think.
Yeah. Overall learnings, every presbytery has different way of doing things. There are many interpretations and understandings of per capita. We found that a lot of these differences also have some sort of regional themes to it. You can almost tell which ones were the old Northern church and which were the Southern, the old Southern church. And as we were reminded not too long ago, that will be almost 40 years. There are still places where we fail to connect around function. Presbyteries are feeling squeezed. There is a need for enhanced interpretation and communication. There is a real desire for a new model of funding, though no one could actually pin down and say, this is the one, but there seems to be a desire for a new one. And as we said before, the pandemic has changed everything. But one thing we did come back and really feel that in listening to all these stories and listening, even during the pandemic, that the church is still very much alive, and there is a lot of energy to keep things going and to serve in new and creative ways.
Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Okay, essentially what you see here, and I won't read it to you, but essentially this is our second recommendation. Yesterday you heard the first recommendation. This is our second one. We are asking for a team to continue the work of the per capita review. The team will develop and implement experiments that could fund councils of the church, of course, above the session, that take into account the adaptive and technical challenges of the mid-councils and the post-pandemic environment. Emphasis is on experiments and pilot programs to learn what will work and perhaps how to implement it on a larger scale. So that is our thing. We're actually looking that in the next, they would report to the next assembly, and then a final report would be after that. So they would have 4 years. It is taken, the per capita is over 150 years old. So to think that we can change the model of funding in just 2 years is just not realistic. We know that it will take time.
So this workshop is not just about telling you about our recommendation or telling you about what we learned. This workshop is about, we want to engage in conversation with you around your council. How can your council enter into conversations around financial sustainability, not just for the national church, not necessarily for the national church, but let's talk too about funding at the presbytery and synod level. That having been said, so that we can have that conversation, I'm going to stop the recording